I don't know. Okay, yeah. Now we're on YouTube here. So awesome. Here we are at the Node tooling group meeting. What is it? Friday, February the 21st of 2020. And so yeah, if everybody could, if you're able, put your name in that minutes document. Um, but yeah, so one thing that we should talk about is so standalone binaries or self-contained binaries. And so the idea here is that wouldn't it be great if you could package up your, and there are ways to do this, of course, but you could package up your CLI app and distribute it to your users, and they wouldn't have to know anything about Node. They wouldn't have to install Node, and you could ship this binary around. Now, we know that people have done stuff like this, and so Zeit is a company that had at least one or two different tools to do this sort of thing. And one of those, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the PKG package, I assume,
Yep.
is one that does this in particular. Is that correct?
Correct. We have PKG, which bundles into a single binary, NCC, which tries to bundle into a single file, and now Node file trace, which traces dependencies of a project.
By traces, what do you mean?
So it crawls the file system and tries to determine all of the files that will be required at runtime, then drops everything that won't be used, just to create like a minimal zip file or something.
Okay.
Yeah, it prunes your node modules basically for whatever's unused.
Okay.
And then yeah, NCC compiles all of your code and dependencies after like reshaking the dependencies into a single JavaScript file. And then yeah, PKG is the one that bundles like your code and the node binary. But are you guys still like supporting PKG?
Right now, we're not using it for any one of our apps, but we're still doing maintenance and security fixes on it. So
okay.
So, do you mind us asking? So, why aren't you using it anymore?
I'm probably not the best person to answer that, but namely, we were using it for our Now desktop app, which we're not really investing in anymore. We're trying to focus more on a web interface. So mostly just not, we don't have a product to dog food it with. So.
Right.
Yeah, because it also let you, like it created binaries for like Windows and Linux and Mac or something.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Yeah.
I believe so, yeah.
It definitely does that. I've used it for that before.
Okay. I think there was some concern that it was maybe like kind of abandoned because it didn't work very well or something like that. But it sounds like that's not really the case. And so, but I mean, I haven't looked at the source of that or anything, but I can only imagine that, it's what you end up with is a very large standalone binary, which basically contains all of Node. It contains all your files, right? It's are you using anything to? I mean, you said you're maybe not the right person to ask, but I guess I'm curious. Like, are you, like changing Node's bootstrap or anything? Like, how does that work?
With regards to package, I'm not aware. I was not an engineer on that project,
Yeah.
so I don't have a lot of context about that. I'd be happy to do some background, some research, and maybe next tooling meeting, be more prepared to answer questions about package. But yeah, so
I mean, yeah, I suppose I could dig into it too, since the source is up there. But I think like it seemed like doing that sort of thing is kind of, I'm going to guess that was kind of a pain in the butt to implement. And what you get, the result is, yes, it's self-contained, but it's not really ideal, because there's just so much cruft, right? I don't know
Right.
if you went and you started disabling modules in Node, or anything like that, but the other, ooh, there's Darcy. So the other part, of course, is, um, you know, you have to have this, you have to compile Node, right? You have to like do hell of compilation to make this work.
So,
And
so for what it's worth, I think it does. I think it skips some of this stuff,
mhm,
if I understand correctly. So I think my understanding. So I've dug through the source code, but it was like a while ago now. So this is totally from memory, and I could be totally wrong. But if I remember correctly, it uses the VM module and then just uses a precompiled node for the target platform, and then just bundles a little wrapper around it. If I understand correctly. Because I don't remember the build did not take long enough for it to be fully compiling Node. I'm positive of that.
Yeah, that's also my. I haven't looked through the source code, but I have used it before, and that's my recollection as well. Like it did bundle fairly quickly. I think it just, yeah, like you said, gets a pre-built binary for whatever architecture and throws it in there. But yeah, I guess the question, like for us, is like, what could we do to make doing this, better supported? At the very least for third-party tools, or is there a first-party way, for us to offer some kind of functionality like this?
So there was an approach suggested by Bradley a number of years ago. I can't remember exactly when, but it was basically having it so that you could have a tarball or maybe some other kind of package like web package or something like that that could be appended to the node binary, and so the node binary would detect, okay, I've got something appended to me, I'm going to go ahead and load that rather than index.js or whatever else. So that was an interesting approach, but I'm not sure that went anywhere beyond just a suggestion.
Yeah, that sounds great. And totally, I actually think that's kind of like what PKG is doing. If I recall correctly.
I think another part of it though too is like slim, or maybe the node binary, right? Because how, like at that point, to ship like 500K of JavaScript, you're shipping like a 40 megabyte node executable, which I think it's been pointed out that like there's a lot of modules that are included by default that you can probably strip out in that kind of an environment.
So do you mean like tree shaking the node binary itself?
yeah, I think so.
Okay, yeah.
I think it will be more of a configuration-based approach. Like you can just like opt out from some of the core modules.
Right.
Right. But I mean, like if you do that, that's where you have to build Node, right? Because you can turn off all these modules, and I don't know which ones you can and can't turn off, but if you do that, you have to compile Node and then et cetera, et cetera.
Well, so that might be fine though, depending on your requirements. So one other use case here that is I think an interesting one is shipping a precompiled version to a production web server, right? So think about, the stuff that Deno's doing to try to make an actually secure platform, right? And they're saying you have to opt into everything. If we wanted to have, some extra security layers, as somebody, who has heavy investment in shipping Node to production web servers, it'd be pretty nice to be able to say like, no, we know this application shouldn't have file system access because we've bundled all the JavaScript together, right? And so now it's all in one thing. We don't even need file system anymore, right? We don't need all these other things that could possibly have security vulnerabilities that we'd be able to compile out. And that doesn't necessarily matter for, maybe an open source CLI or something, but I think for, a company like where I work, it would probably be something we'd be interested in doing.
That particular example might be a little hairy, given that you need like file system to load JavaScript, and so you'd have to like stub it out or do whatever to like load things from somewhere else. You know what I mean? But yeah, definitely. What does this chat say? Oh.
That's maybe actually like a separate topic, is being able to limit things like file system access or network access. I thought I remembered like maybe a year or more ago, someone creating like a third-party package that would let you somehow specify that in your code. I think you could sort of like opt in and say like, these are the things that my package requires. And then I think it would just like throw an exception or something if you tried to use something outside of that. I don't remember. I've actually tried to find that over the last little while. I haven't been able to. I don't know if anyone has any idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so you're talking pretty much exactly about the company I used to work for, which is called Intrinsic. Basically, it would do exactly what you're suggesting. We could set a set of policies over core Node APIs, not just whether or not you could use them, but also like what you could do with them, that kind of thing. That's a huge security topic, perhaps beyond the scope of what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
I do think that's an interesting topic, though. Maybe, yeah, for a future meeting or something like that. I think it's sort of like adjacent to this issue of compiling binaries, but I know that's something my company would be very interested in as well. Like to be able to say, for compliance reasons, like this code can't write to the file system. This code, can't make outbound network requests. It can only respond to requests, things like that. So I don't know. Yeah, maybe that becomes an issue that we talk about another time.
So there is also the Node Core Policy API, which I recently learned about, so I'm not sure if everybody's aware of. I'll find a link and post it in a second here.
I know, like, not to derail too much here, but like the what I guess I'm personally interested in with this sort of thing is how can we make this so we know that you can use PKG and just do this and ship a thing, and I don't know if there's limitations on what it can do, but let's pretend it just works, right? So we know you could do that. We know you can grab an entire node package or whatever and just like stuff everything in this, like, I don't even know what it is, maybe a self-extracting executable that who knows, but you can do that, right? But I mean, I guess what I would like to know is what can Node Core do to make this, like, can we make this easier for somebody to go in and create, kind of change the way Node executes? Okay, so maybe that's changing its bootstrap, and I know there's ways to do this now. And the other thing is, how can we make it performant? How can we make it smaller? Instead of shipping the whole bucket of stuff, we don't ship all of it. Or how can we reduce the startup time if we know that all we need to do is start the VM and start running code? And then of course the third, I guess this is the first part again too, but it's like, how can we make this easier? How can we make it so people don't have, if they want to distribute this way, they don't have to like install all this crap to build Node from scratch? Like, is there a way we could maybe even create a distributable of Node that you could use for this purpose? I don't know, but that's kind of what I wanted to get in, and what I wanted to understand about PKG was, like, what problems did you run into when you were building this thing, and what could have been easier for you to do this in Core? Because that's, I think, a lot of what this group is about, is we want to enable people to build cool stuff like this. But if it was like a terrible pain in the ass to get done, so then we're doing a crappy job of enabling people to do it because they have to hack around things. Anyway, so this policy, where is this? Okay.
Well, so that doesn't really solve that. I linked that not because it's related to bundling binaries. It was more that there is a thing that might help with some of the security parts totally separate. I think the points
Yeah.
you make is that it's more than just that. It's reducing the bundle size, the binary size. It's reducing the startup time. Like those are all valid things to do, totally separate from the policy API, which is really trying to focus on some security concerns.
Yeah, sorry if I derailed things there a little bit. I do think that should be a separate issue. I think one of the things that started, I think the first time we ever had this topic on the tooling agenda was because there was a new API. It was like the V8 like snapshotting API or something. So that's sort of on the topic of Bootstrap like speed. I think that was the thing that started this discussion in the tooling group. So I think that, yeah, if we could expose that somehow, so like you could not only compile Node and your app code, and then also like snapshot its initial state and package that all together into a binary that you can start very quickly. That's one of the best things about NCC is if you're trying to run a package with npx and you haven't bundled it with NCC, like I guess the example, like Joe and I were talking about this at ReactConf. If you do npx create React app, it takes like, I don't know, 6 seconds or something before the command runs. Whereas for create next app, they built it with NCC and it starts in like under half a second. Like a very dramatic difference. And for a CLI tool, like running a command and then waiting 6 seconds is not ideal.
Do you know when they did that? Did they analyze what the biggest wins were?
Joe, do you know anything about that? I recall a little bit from the time, but you probably know more.
With regards to largest wins, most of the wins come from eliminating the whole file system traversal step on boot up. So everything's going to be a single file. So download size is ultra minimal, because this even improves over the wire speed. And then obviously you're only reading in a single JavaScript file. So
yeah, which is great. I think there's other ways we can help solve that as well. So I have an issue open on the modules working group right now to look at doing import maps, which would at least get rid of a ton of the tree traversal parts of the file system reading. It still doesn't turn it into a single file, which is obviously ultimately the best. But anyway, I just thought it'd be interesting to know if it was just being a single file, because that's a pretty straightforward problem, versus like loading HTTP3 and HTTP2 code right in from the all the crypto stuff. Like if we think that just bundling it into a single file is going to give us the 90% case, then I don't think we even need to talk about dropping core APIs, right? Like if that's not going to get us that big of a win.
Well, at least, I mean, the single file makes, I think, the biggest difference, at least on the bootstrapping side of things, right? But then there's still the file size issue. And I mean, NCC doesn't ship with Node, it just bundles your JavaScript. So it doesn't have that problem, but it also doesn't have that advantage of like someone has to have Node installed in order to run your tool. So I think that dropping the core APIs is more related to just slimming down the binary size.
And so, I mean, this makes sense to me as far as just kind of common sense. But if you're using NCC and you publish, so essentially all of those versions of dependencies are locked because they're embedded they're bundled essentially. It's and so if there was like a security concern or something with one of them, it's on the maintainers of whoever is shipping the bundled JavaScript file to make sure they upgrade right away. Users won't automatically get those based on some sort of SEMVer range, right?
correct.
Yeah. So that's
Yes.
I mean that's the trade-off, and
Well, it's a
Yeah, I mean-
two-way street there, because dependencies could upgrade without you realizing and then introduce a malicious code where if they are pinned inside the single file bundle, that's audited every single deploy. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely some advantages to that.
I mean, the other thing is it's kind of congruent. Well, maybe congruent is the wrong word, but similar to how in Node itself, when there are issues with the dependencies in Node itself, that's a compiled thing. It's got all of its dependencies like OpenSSL and various other things built in. It's the same sort of story, right?
Right, and Node checks in Node modules, right? I believe. From I think NPM.
Well, we have vendor code, yeah.
There.
NPM does.
Yeah, unrelated apps, just sorry.
I actually think if you think about CLIs as standalone applications, it just makes sense to ship them as locked-in version. I mean, that's why we have a package lock, and you don't ship, you don't rebuild daily in your production, environment for your web servers either, right? You lock down and you have predictable builds, and when you're on a version, that is a locked-in, set of dependencies. I think thinking about your CLIs in the same way is perfectly reasonable. And I don't think we should seek to change that, at least.
Have you gotten any feedback about NCC where people are running or like complaining about something or running into issues because of the way that create or whatever it's called is bundled?
Oh, create next app, you mean?
Yeah, create next app. Yeah.
We haven't received any negative feedback. If you're referring to the dependencies being pinned, was that the question?
Essentially,
no.
yeah.
No, we haven't received any negative feedback from the community.
The only problem I've ever run into with NCC is if a module uses dynamic imports for some reason, it will break.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, NCC can only statically analyze so far, and it tries to do its best. But yeah, it gets really tricky when you're reading from the file system because we have to rewrite any sort of path.joins or FS reads and relocate those files. So it's best effort in that scenario.
So if you're, say, working on a test runner that needs to load some files, that would be problematic if that test runner was shipped with NCC?
No, not typically. These are usually very edge case dynamic patterns that can't quite be statically analyzed. Like if
edge
you
case
do,
is maybe a strong word there. I mean, Express loads views this way, so.
Sure. So when we see a directory .views and then something arbitrary in the path, we'll bring in the entire views directory just because we don't know what you're going to pluck from that views directory.
Yeah, because you're built on top of Webpack, and that's what Webpack does,
right.
Which is highly problematic for a lot of reasons.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
But if the whole point of the tool is, I mean, if the tool loads arbitrary files from that's not the problem. It's whether
you can dynamically load data files or whatever files, for example, when you're at runtime. It's if you it's more around the dynamic dependencies.
Okay.
So like there's one example that I know broke that. So my last company, we did this for our production web apps. We did it with Browserify and sorry, the NCC part, not the PKG part, right? Not the node bundling node. And there was some library that used like this thing called additions, which was like some weird way to do fat packages, right? So ones that had like source written in new ES6 stuff, but then would also ship bundle down to ES5 and then like some other random version. I can't like what's the precursor to the require.js UMD style definitions. And it did like this dynamic thing. And so there was no normal entry point. It ended up getting like trying to read the file, and that just flat totally broke. with this kind of methodology because it was doing more complicated stuff than even the like Webpack style bundle and everything it thinks it could. That even didn't work. So there are edge cases there, but it did work for things like Express's views. Again, for the same kind of reason, it did bundle everything in the views directory. So it kind of depends.
So this is NCC is built on Webpack. Did I hear that right? So it uses Webpack as the thing to, okay. I've done that with Browserify actually. Yeah, so, or, I mean, it's kind of what Rollup does. I mean, right. Okay. So what would make, I don't even know if maybe I need to ask Webpack this, but like what would make the story around bundling for Node better?
So I don't know if you have to ask Webpack for this because I think they're not trying to solve bundling for Node. Right? This is just a case that worked because they had a JavaScript bundler. I think the thing that I've seen having done this is a better ability to hook into where the file system would be accessed and actually be able to infer more cleanly what is being done. And I'm not entirely sure that's possible in a sane way, right? Like the reason why they chose this sort of not very optimal way is because there's no good way to say, well, if it's dynamic, what could we require in? What could we read with fs.read file, right? And that's what a lot of these modules are doing. So I'm not sure that's like necessarily a goal that we should try to solve. I think a more reasonable goal would be how do we bundle a bunch of JavaScript into a Node app like that, like we were talking, Brian was talking about with append to the binary approach. Like that seems like something core could do that would have like pretty clear value and not introduce all this sort of weird try to detect file system, I don't know, reads.
Right. Yeah. Even as a starting point, I think that would be good. You could bundle your app even with something like NCC and then append that blob of JavaScript to binary and then just change that to the entry point. But even just that would be a good first step. Then after that, we could maybe consider things like how do we slim down the node binary in this case and things like that.
Yeah, that, and then building in the binary cache, right? The V8 cache.
Right.
Instead of it being a third-party dependency, building that straight in would maybe be another layer on there that would be a pretty easy first step.
Right. Okay. So I mean, that's kind of like actually like 3 reasonable actions, I guess. I'm just gonna write those down really quickly, actually.
For this bundling, how would you deal with the special location variables, the double underscore file name, dir name, import meta URL? Like I know for Rollup, I basically have a Babel plugin that rewrites the import meta URL to kind of remap it to the original location. And then for my web deployment, basically I install a copy of the node modules that were used. That way, for example, if something uses import meta URL to reference, say, a PNG file, it can still get the appropriate URL. Because obviously the import meta from the bundle is not correct for the unbundled location.
I'm not sure what we just proposed with those 3 points would necessarily have to cover that. That would still fall into the NCC or Rollup or whatever, tooling you're doing to bundle the JavaScript. Whereas like, I think what we proposed just a second ago was only once you have a bundle, appending it to and turning it into the entry point for a binary.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood that.
Do others agree with that assessment? I thought that's where we landed there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I agree, but I think there's sort of a stretch goal kind of a thing we can have here, which might be to have some kind of hooking mechanism for FS in order to enable tools like this, as well as other completely unrelated things, like, for example, Yarn PNP, or tools that do similar things to that.
Do you have a description you could give of exactly what this would help with in Yarn PNP? I'd like to hear that.
Is it this loader hooks?
I mean, the problem with loader hooks is that doesn't necessarily apply to like arbitrary file system access. So, for example, like any of the loading of images or other assets like that, that wouldn't necessarily be covered by loader hooks, right? So, file system hooks would be sort of another thing in sort of our toolkit of hooks that would allow us to kind of pretend that things are in certain places when they're not.
Interesting.
And for what it's worth, I think that's what with what PKG does. I think it creates sort of a synthetic file system that.
Yeah. So that would be kind of what we were doing with Tink as well. So like Tink and PNP would probably want to take advantage of that for sure.
All right, I added to the minutes some of the those sort of 3 steps that we discussed. Hopefully I captured them accurately. But that does actually kind of give us a way forward to actually work on this.
So is this file system monkey patching part of this, or is that what you just said? It was a stretch goal,
right? I don't think it's necessary or a blocker for any of the other things we discussed. I think it would be a nice to have in order to enable some of this sort of stuff, so that we wouldn't necessarily need a lot of the sort of extra infrastructure that's in things like the bundlers.
So I was under the impression that somebody, and I don't know who, was or people, or there was like a feeling in Node Core that like Tink or whatever shouldn't be doing what it's doing. And maybe it was reaching into the internals in a way that was inappropriate, or I don't know. And
Yeah,
so,
monkey patching FS is not cool. So
Yeah,
give us some APIs we can use. That's for sure.
Right. So I mean, to move forward on that, we'd have to sit down and figure out, okay, what exactly are those APIs that we need?
Yeah, I think it's essentially something around a hook in FS makes a lot of sense, like to dictate where, or like dictate where essentially you're resolving like a cache or something. Like we can say that actually we want to go request a file or something, you know.
And this is because so pretend that if right, the require system or whatever, or import, if it didn't rely on these FS methods, then you wouldn't need to. I mean, that's why you're patching FS, right? Because it underlies the require.
Well, not only that, right? Because if it were only about require or import, then we could rely mostly on the loader hooks, or at least that's my understanding. I haven't looked probably closely enough at loader hooks to fully say, but I'm pretty sure that loader hooks would handle those cases. The more interesting bit, though, is assets that aren't JavaScript files, right? Things like, I see a lot of 9 there, that's good. Things like your images or whatever else, maybe your public or your static folder if you're doing a web app, that kind of thing. Because those things, you can't really handle those with just your loader hooks. You need a completely different set of hooks or a completely different system to deal with that. And that's what things like Tink and PNP are doing to just sort of shim the entire file system in order to make this happen. Now, of course, they're doing it with shimming rather than hooks, and that's slightly problematic for a number of reasons, and that's why I'm thinking hooks are the approach that should be taken here.
I agree fully, and I hadn't actually looked at the PNP file system stuff, but wow. Yeah, it's crazy.
For what it's worth, Mel is a colleague of mine. I could probably get him to join the next meeting if we want to talk
I
about it.
actually reached out to him a little while ago. Him and I have chatted a little bit before, but he's not get back to me on that one. So I think he would potentially be a really good person to have.
Yeah, I'll ping him to maybe join the next meeting.
I got to drop, but I would love to continue like that conversation async if possible, and definitely with Mael for sure.
Cool. All right. See you, Darcy.
Cheers.
Should we maybe move on to another topic for the rest of the meeting? There's, I know Ben isn't here to talk about like source maps and some stuff like that, but.
Well, I mean, has there been any, does anybody have any like reasonable progress on anything they want to talk about, or anything else they'd like to talk about other than what we're talking about?
Not really for me.
NPM workspaces.
Oh yeah, we could talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, lay it on us.
Yeah, the RFC is out there. Have you checked it out yet, Chris?
I have not.
All right, so to do, yeah, let me drop the link to the group. Wait a
All right, let me throw this in the doc.
Yeah, basically defining the basic support. I think the core of the workspace support right now is that we want to make sure we get right the installing part of it, right? So we kind of already have a sort of stretch goal of supporting running some of the subcommands across all the workspaces. That's already a kind of a stretch goal. So, but yeah, maybe to the tooling group, yeah, maybe it's a good question for all of you to have in mind, like what can we maybe do to better improve tooling around this? Like maybe it's going to be in a further RFC release, or maybe it can make its way into this original one. I don't know, maybe just something to keep in mind.
Has anybody, I don't want to monopolize this since I've given a lot of feedback on the workspaces thing. Has anybody else checked it out or have feedback?
I have not looked at the RFC yet.
I'm wondering if it has any impact from an APM perspective, because that is my current employer, an APM company. In terms of how it installs things, and if it ends up being any significant difference, like for example, Yarn PNP is. Having not looked at the RFC yet myself, so maybe this isn't an issue.
Wait, so what is the question exactly?
Oh yeah, so oftentimes in APM land, we're concerned with where things are installed in order to make sure that we are properly dealing with the sort of shims and tracing kind of things we need to do. So it's just a question of whether workspaces in NPM will change whether or not, well, not whether or not, will change where these paths end up being and how much extra work we have to do in order to deal with that. It might be nothing. I don't know. I haven't read the RFCs, so.
Yeah, I would imagine that, you know, unless, I mean, I don't know. Do you take consideration of PNPM and stuff when doing this? Or?
Yeah, so yeah, it's the model is pretty close to what PNPM does. It's basically just it will try to heist anything that is shared across the workspaces to the top level, but it will symlink into the proper place. So ideally, everything is in the place where they need to be, right?
But this is like for a working copy, right? So I mean, I don't know if that, how does that fit in with the APM stuff if it's not really the thing that's going to be deployed? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know nothing about APM.
I don't know either.
I don't think
maybe it doesn't apply at all. I'll need to read the RFC.
Yeah, but it sticks to the basic node modules file structure, so it's probably going to be all right. Yeah.
I agree. I think it probably is. It's very similar in proposal right now to what Yarn v1 workspaces are, which shouldn't have any problems because it's just using the module resolution stuff. So I've given a little bit of my feedback over there, but I'd be interested to hear y'all's opinions on this. One of the things that I'm trying to push them toward is stopping thinking about this as only a monorepo concern. So almost everything I work on is multi-repo. I have a ton of modules that I work on where I'm working on them together, and I want a workspace, but the fact that all of the existing workspace tooling features are around a very specific file hierarchy, which lends itself to a monorepo, doesn't really suit any of my workflows. So if I'm working on something like, let's do a concrete example, Express, and then the router for V5, right? I have a file structure where Express is in just a general directory called, I think I have it called projects, right? And then I have at Pillar.js, which is the organization on GitHub that it's under, /router, right? So and then in my projects directory has all these other modules that are not Express related. They're just random things. So I can't build a workspace where I have Express and at Pillar.js /@Pillar.js/router, because it's in a it's shared across all these other random projects that I might be working on at any given time, right? So I'm interested in hopefully pushing the NPM workspaces implementation to think about these kind of use cases where, you know, the file structure is less what defines a workspace, and what you're working on defines, you know, you as a user could mix and match things. I say arbitrarily, and maybe there's limits to the arbitrariness of it, but like at least saying like adjacent directories should be able to be in a workspace, like if I so choose. Does that make sense? Or you know, does anybody relate to this?
Well, so what would the difference between that be? And so say you went into VS Code and you created a workspace in VS Code and you added 2 disparate directories to it. What's the difference between what you're talking about and that?
That it would share modules, right? So if I said in Express require router, right, and router is checked out on my local machine and in my workspace, it should be using the router that is there, not the router that it installed from the registry, right? Because it's in a workspace together.
And because NPM link is all hinky.
These are my current workflows are all NPM link based, and they're a disaster, and they're really painful.
Yeah, I agree. Same with Yarn link is also just like, they're both not sufficient for anything really.
Yep.
Yeah, the workspace is a much better model to work about this package together, right? Managing this mess. Yeah. But yeah, I was particularly careful to not write down the word monorepo into the RFC.
I thank you for that, except it was up to everyone else to very quickly bring it up 100 times in the RFC so far. I know.
Wes, I have a question for you. In the use case that you were just describing, do you only want a better way to share like your modules that you're working on that you have locally, or would those 2 projects that you're describing also share like their node modules that they pulled from NPM?
So I think they should be fine sharing their node modules. So I'd actually like to move to a world where we're more like PNPM, and it's just a flat global cache of modules with a bunch of pointers to tell you where to get them. That said, I understand why that's definitely not the world we're in today. And I think jumping straight to that is probably not feasible. But I do think that if I defined a workspace that so happened to include 2 packages that shared a version of Mocha, then I should only have one version of Mocha on the file system, and they should both know how to find it.
Yeah, that is an interesting idea. Like, yeah, I have like 20 different microservices at work, and they probably share like 80% of their modules. However, I would still want a way to like build and test where their modules are maybe self-contained, because that's what's going to actually be getting built and run on the server.
Yeah. So
but
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
so the way I see that is that workspaces is a local addition that shouldn't, and this is where I go a little bit further from what Yarn is doing today, and why I don't like it, because that makes the build time for the application dependent on the workspace, right? So the way I see it working, if I got my full dream way, would be that if it's in a workspace, I've defined that, and then it runs in context of the workspace. If I go ahead and just go into that directory, say, and just run npm install, it should get totally not workspace related behavior, right? So like, again, in this express and router case, if I'm in a workspace root that defines express and router as in my workspace, and I run npm install, it would do some linking and share the dependencies. If I CD'd over to router and I redid the same install, it'd totally ignore the workspace behavior, and it would just do an install, giving you the behavior you're saying there, right?
Right.
It is pretty
Interesting. No,
Yeah,
go
it
ahead,
is.
Roy.
Yeah, it is pretty much what the RC is describing right now. Yeah, the only difference is that right now we actually intend to put a package lock inside Express Router, which we'll reference to the top level, the hoisted one.
Right, and that's one of the things that's why I don't like that part of it as it stands today, because again, if like this is all fluid stuff, like a developer's workflow is fluid. You might be working with 3 packages together right now, and then in an hour's time, be only working in one of them, right? And like, this is my day to day is transitioning between this, and the tools today make that just a big pain, right? Like I link and then I unlink, and then, oh, now that I installed a random package, it destroyed all my links. So I got to go back and relink everything. It's like, oh, wow, super painful.
So wait, so if you went into Express Router and you said npm install, and Express was one of your dev dependencies, I assume, for testing or something.
Okay,
what
it's
would
not,
happen?
sure, it's in a hypothetical.
Sure. Like what should happen? If there was that link there, should the link be destroyed?
So if I went in to, so the hypothetical here is I have package A, which references package B.
Right.
I've done a workspace that includes both of them and npm
Right.
installed in there. So it's set up a link between package A and package B.
Yes.
I then go into package B and I type npm install. Should it destroy the link and replace it with what I got from the remote, or should it keep the link? And I think that's a great question.
So in the current proposal, it will put a package lock within package B. It will have a reference to the same linking to the hoisted package, right? To the hoisted express, and it will just like same link it again, right? So that is pretty much the direction we're heading with the RFC.
Personally, that's what I would want to happen, because right now Lerna doesn't do that, and it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
So actually, I agree with you. That is the behavior I would expect there. If I removed my node modules and didn't have a package lock, then I would not expect it to go find a workspace and implement the workspace logic.
So yes,
where I'm at.
Yes,
that's a great discussion for the group. That's one of the points I brought to Isaac. We should probably have a better story around that. Like, people might want to eject a package that is part of a workspace, right? Like the way you want. Like that's pretty much what you described, right? So we should probably have some, maybe not tooling necessarily, but like some story, some feature, something within the npm core to allow for a better experience in that case.
I mean, it seems to me like unless npm was doing something where it crawled up to parent directories and started looking for workspaces, it should just work, right? Because if that lock is missing, you don't know anything about the link, and you have a package JSON in there, it doesn't say anything about workspaces, and you have no modules, it should just work.
Yeah, it just installs from the registry, right?
And I think it should just work. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, if I had a package lock that had a workspace in it, that would break in my CI. So that definitely shouldn't happen, right? If I'm not in a mono repo setup, and you then made a package lock in my local, router, right? So router, well, actually it'd be Express. So Express has a dependency on router. I then do a workspace, and you now put a workspace relative path in my lock, and I push it, that would break in CI, right? So it definitely should not do that because it won't exist in CI, right? Like in my CI, I want it to install from the registry.
Yeah, Jordan brought up the case for like what it happens on CI, what it happens like if I want to test across different versions published versus the link. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of workflows here, and I'm worried that we'll think about the monorepo use case and then ignore these other ones like Yarn did. And then we'll end up with, again, just tooling that just doesn't work for me.
I think we're about out of time. Actually, well, I see we have 2 minutes, but we should wrap it up.
What? Sorry, can I? Wes,
yeah, final thoughts.
Wes, are you on Slack, on the Node tooling Slack?
Yep.
All right. Do you think you and I could, maybe not today, but at some point soon, could we have more of a discussion around this? Because I think that what you're describing would be useful to me with the Istanbul.js. One of the things that would be really nice for me is to be able to basically test NYC with an updated copy of, say, Istanbul lib instrument without having to publish that package first.
Absolutely. So this is my primary concern right now. And I'm happy to talk on Slack anytime. We should probably do it in one of the channels though, so that it's, because I think like Rory and other folks would probably love to see the outcomes of this. So anyway, yeah, let's continue the conversation for sure.
Ben sends his regards. He said something about I'll get a calendar entry in
He's been saying that for months.
I don't even remember what he wants to meet about. Does anybody know?
Yeah, wasn't it argument parsing? I think that's what he wants to set up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
all right. Anyways, please, everyone, go check the RFC. Left any comments you have. Be very helpful.
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
See you guys.
See you later.
Bye.